Fan hysterics reach a fevered pitch as the series roars its way to the finish line. Is it a misunderstood masterpiece or an abject failure? Find out when Johnnie Torch reviews Obi-Wan Kenobi Episodes 4, 5, and 6. Well, welcome back to another Johnnie Torch Reviews on a very hot and steamy, muggy Saturday afternoon. We're going to take a look at the conclusion, the final half of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Again, a very controversial series. I don't really see why. I understand there's some problems with it, and I'm sure we'll get to them in the course of this video. Again, probably a longer video because we're doing 3 episodes, probably over an hour show, but we're going to try to break it down. We are going to talk some of the controversies and issues that the series have, but I'm going to try to save some of my ranting for a separate video, so hopefully I'll be able to get that one out. Completely unscripted. We're just going to, off the cuff, take on the Obi-Wan Kenobi series now where we left off. And I'm going to try to put minimal slides in the back here because I don't want to take too long with stopping and going. But for those of you who are watching this and not just listening to it, give you a little something to look at. And of course, this is a little different. I have to explain. I never was able to get images in the background here. If somebody has any information on how to do that, let me know. This is the new way I have to do it, which is to put it in photo editor, and then you get an even smaller picture than the already small picture that we were getting. But we pick up in episode 4. And if you haven't seen my review of episodes 1, 2, and 3, you might want to check that out before you get to this one. But we pick up in episode 4 after Vader completely decimated Obi-Wan in battle. There was the great rematch from Revenge of the Sith where Obi-Wan's still not particularly finding his groove, and he was very afraid. That's the problem. Fear is foreign to a Jedi, and Obi-Wan was very afraid of Vader, as of course he had reason to be. And he lost that fight pretty bad. Vader dragged him through the flames, and very visceral fight, very short and not very well choreographed, I might say, but it was understandable. It felt more like Return of the Jedi's fight. Now, not to talk too much about the previous episode, but that's where we pick up. And it was a nice juxtaposition here where you have Obi-Wan in the bacta tank healing up from the burns. You have Vader with a much more severe condition in his own bacta tank. And Obi-Wan is still, of course, recovering mentally as well as physically from all this. Now, I have to say that I haven't seen this episode in several weeks, so I'm going to try to go by memory and not, belabor each and every issue. But next, we see Obi-Wan has found himself alongside this sort of rebel faction that is not quite part of the Rebel Alliance, but they're the Underground Railroad that is sort of taking escaping Jedi who are trying to flee from the Empire and trying to take them out into a safe space. It's a pretty interesting concept that would be interesting to see if they ever follow up on in a future series. A lot of people are saying some of these characters in this scene could have or still could find their way to the Andor series that's going to be out pretty soon. So we have Ice Cube Jr. here, I honestly don't know his name. The actor is the son of Ice Cube. I think his name was Roka, Roken, something like that. I think Roka was from Flash Gordon. I think they were trying to tie it into that. But he's the de facto leader here. He's kind of reluctant to help Obi-Wan and the crew. And his wife was a Jedi, and she was chased down. Or his wife was, I guess, Force sensitive. And again, the first thing I thought of is, don't you mean husband? But again, thankfully, this show is not overly woke. We'll get into some of the wokeness of it in a few minutes, but they really could have beat us over the head a lot worse had they decided to go there. And fortunately, they didn't. The virtue signaling is kept pretty much to a minimum. So Leia has been kidnapped by Reva. And of course, Reva is interrogating her. And I guess this is it's kind of meant to evoke, I guess, a new hope. And the idea is that Leia is a tough cookie, and even as a child, she's not going to crack. But to me, it isn't sold well, because Reva is about as intimidating as a bowl of tapioca pudding. I mean, quite honestly, that's been probably the biggest problem I've had with the series, is I don't feel Moses Ingram is well cast in this show. Now, we'll talk more about how her role evolves as we continue, but for this first half of the series or season, I think she's supposed to be playing a pretty convincing heavy, and she is not convincing at all. Now, I know you can have that work for you in some sense, because it was like, well, we could see she had a good side all along. Well, no, not really. I mean, she cuts off this woman's hand for particularly no reason. I don't really see her as like, I mean, I suppose even Kylo Ren, as bad as those sequel trilogy movies are, the showing of his conflict was, at least understandable. There really is no conflict here. We don't really see where Reva's coming from, other than she desperately wants to get Obi-Wan, and she'll do anything, no matter how shady, and no matter literally going to torture a 10-year-old in order to reach those ends. So again, this does not feel like a character on the road to redemption, so that when, again, spoilers, when she gets to that point of being redeemed, it feels all the more hollow, because we don't feel any empathy for this character all along. I mean, we felt empathy for Vader in Jedi, at least, long before his turn. You get a sense of the conflict within him. Reva has no conflict. She's basically just there to be the heavy, and an unconvincing heavy at that. And I think that is the main problem with the series, not all the McCannon, you're ruining McCannon. It really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how weak they made this character, considering that she was going to be sort of the linchpin of this series, and they made her so important in the series, and yet they can't, or they couldn't seem to find a happy medium from this character. They couldn't make her an all-out villain, nor did they want to sort of show their hand that there was a conflict within her. So they're going to go to the planet. I don't remember the name of the planet. They're going to try to find Leia and save her. And the character that I had come to call Mrs. Poochie, because she was the character from The Human Target, plays a big role here. It's not that I don't remember the actress name. I don't know how to pronounce it too well. But the character's name is Tala. I did remember that. And she is like an undercover Imperial agent. She's undercover for the rebellion, so to speak, but she's got credentials as an Imperial agent, and she walks in to the Imperial stronghold while Obi-Wan sneaks himself in, kind of like using the underwater breather, like in Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith. And she, automatically commands respect with the Imperials. They don't want to let her in, and she's, basically throwing her weight around. You'll call me sir, and you'll let me in. I've got business. And they're like, oh, okay. Now, again, this is a problem with Disney Star Wars, that the entire original trilogy, all the Imperial officers are all old white dudes. And maybe some not so old, but they're all old white dudes. And so when they want to do this diversity thing, like for instance, when they show Roken and his people, and they're all various ethnicities, Black, Asian, Latino, Indian, Arabic, that I can understand. It feels kind of natural that the rebellion is made up from all different corners of the galaxy, and you'll find people from all different walks coming together to defeat the Empire. But the Empire was not particularly shown that way. I mean, in Return of the Jedi was the only Star Wars movie where they kind of made those overtures and tried to show that, yeah, there was a black pilot, there was an Asian pilot, there were some guys around the conference table of different races. And they kind of made the effort late in the day to do that. Of course, the real world reason is because they were shooting the films in England, and it was a lot of England, British extras and supporting roles went to them. Sort of, I think the same thing happened when they were doing the prequels up in New Zealand, and some New Zealanders actors found their way to the films. But in this case, it does kind of stick out, where we had a lot of old white dudes, and now we have women of color, we have uh, men of color, we have basically all different kind of walks in the Empire, and it really doesn't go too far in portraying them as space Nazis, which is what I guess their real function is supposed to be. And again, this is not a thing that really sinks this show for me, or any Disney Star Wars in general. But you have to admit that it is sort of setting itself in a sort of different era than the original trilogy. You have to wonder if things happened in the Empire between now and like 10 years from now or whatever, when the Empire pretty much said, we're not going to let anybody but old white guys run the Star Destroyers and the bases and this and that. All right, so I don't really mind Tala. I think she was a good character. I liked her. I think she had some acting chops that Reva doesn't have. She was a pretty good character. But the problem, particularly in this episode, is they focus an awful lot of time on her being daringly resourceful. It's like we don't really need to see so much of her and her quick thinking, and she's got enough athletic prowess to knock out stormtroopers who are, the stormtroopers are pretty inept as it is, but seeing her take them out so easily also it is what it is. We get it. She's a strong woman. We don't need to see that much of her. This is an Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and this was a very short episode as it was. So seeing so much of her, it really wasn't necessary. And again, this is where the wokeism comes in, where they're not virtue signaling and beating you over the head with, oh, look at how progressive we are and this and that, but they are having to put the focus. They got to put the camera on the female characters. We had to cast a female person of color to be a strong woman in the Rebel Alliance. We had to cast, a black woman as an Inquisitor as a Padawan turned Inquisitor turned back to Jedi, or whatever she was status is at the end of that. It's, the message is still there. And I really wish they would have just, everybody wishes they would just cut out the message entirely. But the thing is with this show is they buried the message pretty well. My problem with Reva isn't so much that she's a message character, although she is. It's that she's written poorly and acted not quite so well. It's the same thing here. There's no problem with the character of Tala. It's just that they focus on it just a little too much, so that you do have that reminder of, oh, look, we have to have a powerful female character taking up a lot of screen time. And a lot of people, unfortunately, I think that's carried over to Leia and, little Leia in this series as well, where they're like, well, they're putting too much of little Leia in it. Well, you have to remember that little Leia turns out to be Big Leia, and Big Leia is a big character in the saga. You really can't do without her. We'll talk about her in a minute. Let me move on from this right now. But all right, I didn't understand this concept of Obi-Wan. He's in the bowels of the fortress, so to speak. That's kind of a weird sounding term, I know. And he's looking around, and he sees this sort of taxidermy center where, for some reason, and I don't get this was lost on me, I personally didn't recognize any of these figures that were in this sort of wax museum. But he goes through and sees these well-preserved corpses, I suppose, of Jedi and Padawans, all like encased in amber or something. And I didn't really understand what that meant. Of course, I'm not a big EU guy. I don't know a lot about stuff. And I admit it. I mean, I watched all of Clone Wars. Uh, a lot of it was forgettable to me, to be totally honest with you. It's just, Anakin fighting Dooku again for the 97th time. Obi-Wan's going to try to do something with the corporate alliance or whatever. I don't know. It just didn't register with me. And then I watched Rebels. I missed the last couple seasons. It was different because the focus was not so much on the original characters. But again, a lot of this doesn't register with me. The most I remember is a lot of the early Clone Wars days of the animated series, and some of the EU comics and stuff. Quinlan Voss, I think I remember vaguely in some of the comics I owned. I probably haven't read them in several years. And, there's some characters that I know. I didn't recognize any of them in this, but apparently I don't know what this means. Apparently, I think it's just Reva collecting pelts, as it were, in a very creepy and off-putting way. I'm not sure. All right, so Obi-Wan comes back, and he's laying waste to the stormtroopers as he rescues Leia. Leia's in that like torture chair that Rey was in, which I guess was something that she gets put in on the Death Star eventually. And the original Obi-Wan is back. The problem is, and again, this has been my main problem with the show, apart from Reva, is why don't they have these epic moments? There should have been some passionate moment. We don't get Qui-Gon. We'll talk about him at the end. We don't get Qui-Gon appearing to Obi-Wan and sort of spurring him on and being that rah-rah voice in his head that says, basically what he was to Luke in the Battle of the Death Star, the trench run. Trust your feelings, trust me, and this and that. You would think he would hear Qui-Gon's voice at some point during all this. They wanted to save that for like the big finale. But instead of it being sort of a throwaway cameo, it would have been nice if they could have worked a couple of these lines into the actual story at the point where he needed. And again, this is like maybe the third time in this episode. He's also, again, sort of trying to reach Qui-Gon, and for some reason he can't, even though he's now apparently well connected with the Force. And we don't get that epic moment. We don't see the switch come on. We don't see him sort of experience the Force again, full blown, for the first time in 10 years. He's just back. He's back on the horse, and he's doing great. And again, if this was written by people who had a passion for it, who just loved the saga implicitly, they would have found a way to come up with these moments. Again, instead of a little extra scene about Tala trying to explain why she's not a traitor to Reva. Give us a moment or two on Obi-Wan reconnecting with the Force in a big way. Give us, instead of Reva questioning Leia and taking an extra scene there, show him connecting to the Force where Qui-Gon says maybe 2 words of encouragement to him, 2 sentences of encouragement. That would have gone a lot further than just him sort of turning the switch back on because he took a nice rest in the Bacta tank. That's the kind of stuff that bugs me about the show, is that I want the passion. Anybody else that's a Star Wars fan, I think, would have written this with a lot more passion. That's the problem behind the sequel trilogy, is there was no passion. It was all about the new characters. Nobody cared about Han, Luke, Leia, 3PO, R2, Chewie. It was, let's do this story. And I think here it's not that they're not treating Obi-Wan and some of the original characters with respect as much as that they don't feel enough that this comes to mind. They're not thinking, oh yeah, we need to show this because this would be a great character moment. No, it's just, time to go, time to get on with it. Let's move on with it. Let's go. Another thing I liked about this scene was Obi-Wan using the Force for the first time, doing something big, like Moses parting the Red Sea. He's holding the water pressure back while the stormtroopers and everyone's trying to get in. And, it's like just an epic use of the Force. And it was good that we saw him do something like that at that point. And I thought that was really good. Okay, so let me change the image while we're getting to the end of this episode. The snow speeders come in. First time we've seen snow speeders in quite a long time. It's been a minute. And that was a lot of fun. This, of course, I think this was like intentionally supposed to be silly. This was, they're trying to sneak out of the Imperial stronghold, and Leia really has nowhere else to hide but under Obi-Wan's coat. But again, I found this to be, it reminds me of how when they were sneaking out of the Death Star in A New Hope, it felt pretty much like that. And I think that was keeping with sort of the, the kitschiness of Star Wars. It seems like it was all right to me. All right, so Reva, tries to attack them, and Tala ends up being her cover blown, and they have words, and they all jump into the cockpit of the snow speeder, the back seat, and of course everybody's like, how do they all fit in the back seat? Well, like I said, that's almost like when Obi-Wan captured Jango Fett. He was supposed to bring him in for questioning, and he was supposed to put him in the spare parts container. I don't know where he was supposed to put him, but maybe these early model snow speeders were very roomy. I don't know. All right, so Vader shows up pretty ticked because of all of Reva's incompetence. And quite honestly, people thinking that Reva is a Mary Sue, I think she's really a Mary Sue in reverse. She hasn't done anything right in this show up to now, and she doesn't really do anything right in the show all the way through, except at the very end, I suppose. And Vader's fed up with her. And, Vader's threatening me with a good time here, because by all rights, Vader should be fed up with her and just dispatch her and continue on his merry way. But she plays a pretty dangerous gamble here. She says that she put a tracker in Lola, and they're going to track Obi-Wan and get him before it's too late. So Vader's pleased with this. He thinks this is an okay plan, and he decides to spare her and let her live. And so the show moves on. And let's see. I thought this was a pretty nice moment. They have Leia and Obi-Wan sort of connect. And I felt this was very Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, with Sindel and Noah. I feel like this is kind of something George Lucas would approve of. I think a lot of stuff in this show Lucas would approve of. We'll talk a little bit near the end of that, near the end, about uh, what influence he has on this and what influence he doesn't, because I think this has been split up into two sections, this story. And there's a good side and a bad side to it. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's pretty much the end of this fourth episode, where, it looks like all is well. They're being followed, they're being chased, they're being harried, but trust in the Force to save the day. All right, so let's move on to episode 5. And this was a very good episode. See, they started building back up the momentum. I thought it was a good start in episode 4. Episode 5, we see them open up with the flashback. This is what everybody was waiting for. Everybody was excited about this. The flashback, seeing Hayden Christensen return as Anakin Skywalker in his glory, as if the Attack of the Clones era had never passed. I think they used some de-aging CGI on both of them. Ewan McGregor was pretty passable. Hayden Christensen does not look 19 here. I'm sorry to say. He does look like he's 40 years old. But again, this doesn't ruin it for me. A lot of people were... I actually see a lot of fans of the show complaining about the people complaining about this. I mean, I'm just pointing out an obvious fact. I mean, this doesn't ruin the show for me by any means. But it is pretty obvious that they didn't make an effort here to... Well, they didn't make a good enough effort to de-age Hayden, because he does look quite 40 here. And they've set this ostensibly before Padme comes back into the story, so he should be 19 or younger. And it doesn't seem it. Of course, I thought this was a good... encapsulation of their relationship, where Anakin is arrogant, as Obi-Wan has famously said. He's arrogant. He's prideful. He is being overly aggressive for a Jedi because winning means that much to him. It means more to him than doing it the right way, doing it by the book. He's going to win, and he's going to win by being aggressive. That's the way he's going to win. And Obi-Wan tries to counsel him in this and tell him that that's not the Jedi way, and, your need for winning is not that important. But, and as we see over the course of this episode, it's a game that's being played out as well in real time with Obi-Wan and Vader, because Obi-Wan knows Anakin so well, and that's what's so great about it. They both know each other so well that they're sort of anticipating each other's moves in the right way. And they're very accurate in what their plans are, one for the other. So Vader's contemplating all this. Meanwhile, they land on the planet where I guess they're all supposed to take off and escape and go their separate ways. Reva and her party go down on the surface there with all the stormtroopers. They lock themselves in, sort of a Helm's Deep situation, where they're, sort of waiting out the inevitable battle once they breach the forces. This is another thing that was a source of consternation to many. So they can't get the doors open to get into the big spacecraft and blast off, and they can't get into the vent to fix the door opening mechanism that the recently bugged Lola ruined. So Princess Leia makes the offer to go fix it, and Obi-Wan's like, go ahead, let her do it. And of course the fandom went hysterical. How dare baby Princess Leia have something to do? How does she know how to fix a door opener in some kind of broken down Regular One base, which is what it looked like to me. And it's the most ridiculous complaint ever, really. I mean, when you look at it, First of all, Princess Leia knew how to fix. She did some welding on the Falcon. Apparently, she knew something about mechanics. I don't think we can underplay that. But you got to remember also that her father, Anakin, built a protocol droid from scratch when he was 9 years old. That's kind of an inherent uh, thing for Leia, maybe the mechanical. But then again, where do we see this? Where do we see this in the entire original trilogy? Another thing I think is when you consider that in this galaxy far, far away, you have to imagine that some kind of elementary level of mechanics is taught to all kids, I think, because everything seems to work on some kind of robotic principle here. I mean, you've got droids and doors opening on their own and this and that. I don't think it's too much of a stretch that baby Princess Leia goes into the vent. It takes her 45 minutes to do this, by the way. I mean, this is not like a snap of the fingers and she's smarter than anybody else there. She basically toys around in that little cubby hole for like 45 minutes until she figures out, I guess, I don't know, the red wire goes here or something, and she manages to open it up. This was only done because she was the only one that could fit in there, really. So, I mean, this is not, but you got people, I don't get this. This is not the way it was in the original trilogy. Leia never did this. She's not Mr. Scott. Well, this is not really something that's breaking canon when she's basically fixing a stuck door. You know what I mean? I don't see how you can go hysterical over something like this. But hysterical, many went, and they will continue to go hysterical through the rest of the series as we will chronicle. But again, I'm at a loss to understand how touchy some people are about these things. And of course, I look at it also from a story writing perspective. Now, as a writer, I understand how these things go. You're supposed to give your character something to do. The main characters, not every background character has to have a story. You give your main character something to do. Princess Leia is a main character both in the saga and in this series. So having her sit in the background and pick her nose is not going to go far. That's not going to fly as a storyteller. This is the same principle that George Lucas used in A New Hope when he realized that Obi-Wan wasn't doing anything interesting in the third act. He was unnecessary. So while Luke is flying the planes and Han Solo saves him and Princess Leia is in jeopardy, what is Obi-Wan doing? He's doing absolutely nothing. So Lucas made the smart move and a brave move, the decision to kill off Obi-Wan halfway through, just before the third act. But at the time, Yoda wasn't a character, and the script was going to call for Obi-Wan to train Luke. Obi-Wan was going to die in the same manner as Yoda died in Return of the Jedi. But he had to sweep that all away because when you have an important character, you don't put them on the bench with absolutely nothing to do. The question would be, well, why doesn't Obi-Wan get into his own X-Wing? Why doesn't he try to blow up the Death Star? He's got the Force. He probably could do it better than Luke, who's a fledgling Jedi at best. He barely knows anything about it at this point. And that's why George Lucas knew he had to kill him off. But it's the same thing here where you're trying to give the character something to do. And to sort of scratch your head and act like, I don't know, how can she fix a door? I mean, she's 10 years old. It's pretty sad. That's what I mean about, if you're going to complain about something, I don't mind hearing the complaints. I'll entertain every complaint on the show. And there are many. And it's not difficult to find issues to complain about on this show. But when you're going to complain about something like that, come on, don't insult my intelligence. Give me something that's at least halfway decent to complain about. If you're going to say this ruins my canon. All right, so moving right along. All right, so Bail does a bonehead move. Now, again, this is something that I guess you can complain about this one, too. Bail Organa does a bonehead move, and he sends a message to Obi-Wan. Everybody knows, if you remember The Phantom Menace, when Obi-Wan says he's getting holograms from, what's his name? Sio Bibble, I think. saying you must contact me and whatever. And Obi-Wan says it's a trick. Don't reply. So Bail Organa sends a message to Obi-Wan saying basically, I'll look over Luke, I'll watch after Luke, but you haven't gotten back to me in a week or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, of course. You haven't got back to me, and I'm getting a little concerned. I'll help Owen on Tatooine watch after Luke until you get back. Now, honestly, and I probably said this in the first part of this review in episode 1 when we were reviewing that, that was something I expected Bale to say at the beginning. I thought he was going to say, look, you're not leaving your post. I'm taking over for you. I'm going to watch over Luke as long as it takes for you to get Leia back, and then I need you to do this for me. They didn't do any of that. Now it's obvious why, because they wanted him to do this message, this ill-conceived message that was going to fall into the wrong hands. Bail for doing the message because I can understand he's a concerned parent. He's at the point of desperation, and he's going to reach out to Obi-Wan and say, I haven't heard from you for a while. Can you give me an update? Are you still alive? But this, of course, also spirals into, it's terribly written. It's a horrible show. The premise of him is awful and this and that. Again, this is kind of in the parameters of characters acting normally in a situation. I can buy that Bale is in the throes of desperation. He wants to know what's happening. He sends this message. Maybe he's a little careless because he's so panicky and disconsolate over the situation. But, I'm not going to hold that against him. I'm not going to hold that against the writing. I don't see that being a big issue. All right, so let's move on now to Reva. And we get the swerve that surprised absolutely no one. Everyone knew this was coming. Everyone in the world knew that Reva was a Padawan, and she was there in the temple the night that Vader, not Anakin, but Vader took on the Jedi in the temple, killing them all, killing all the Padawans. And she witnessed all her friends go down. She witnessed all her teachers and Jedi go down. And she was the sole survivor of Order 66 in the Jedi Temple. Now, this isn't really that big of a deal, but there is a couple of issues with this. Now, I know the first thing people are going to say is, or have said, is that, well, why does she know Anakin's Vader from this? And again, this doesn't take a lot of figuring. Now, that's what I mean. A lot of people claim they don't want to be spoon-fed things. This kind of is obvious. Now, if she's a Padawan in the temple, she's probably seen Anakin from time to time. She probably knows who Anakin is to begin with because, if you remember from Revenge of the Sith, Grievous says, I expected someone with your reputation to be a little older. So everybody knows who Anakin is. I mean, he's the star player of the team of the Jedi. Everybody knows him. So that was easy enough to understand. Now, how does she know that he's Vader? See, the thing is, at this point, he has been christened Vader. The Emperor has already called him Darth Vader. So his name is Vader from here on in. Now, they didn't specifically show it. And again, do you need to be spoon-fed this information? But you have to imagine at some point, one of the clone troopers must have called him Lord Vader or Darth Vader. And she heard it because she's playing dead by her own words, that she's just lying there playing dead so that she don't get, killed for real. So I don't see where that's a problem, that you didn't hear a clone trooper actually say that. Now, hindsight being 2020, I think they should have had that happen. They should have had that scene so that people couldn't complain. But of course, since they didn't, this has been also a source of consternation for folks. Of course, another issue that gets brought up is it looks like Reva, in the first flashback here, it looks like Anakin/Vader swats Reva with a lightsaber. And later on, when Vader goes to stab Reva, she's remembering this incident again as if she is living through being stabbed again. Now, I think that's more just a artistic choice where they made it look like she was stabbed as a child during the second flashback. Because if you see the first flashback, he just like waves his lightsaber at her, and then she kind of gets blurry eyed and falls down. It doesn't particularly look like a stabbing, but since it's happening at the same time she's being stabbed again, it kind of makes you feel that way, that it could be a stabbing again. Now, I said from the beginning, they should have given her like an eye patch or a robotic arm or something to sort of show that she was injured in this. Instead of like, well, how did this kid get up, manage to survive? And again, this is something that is, inbred into the character of Riva, that for some reason her hate has made her powerful and she's able to survive. Look at Tala's brave end. So Obi-Wan and crew all decide to go further and further into Helm's Deep, so to speak, into Regular One, so that they can escape the oncoming onslaught of the stormtroopers. I think this is kind of what people are expecting. It was going to be, Obi-Wan versus the stormtroopers and this and that. And we get some of that, but Tala goes down. She dies for the cause. This was all right, with me. I think it would have rang more hollow. See, this is the problem. People want to say this is woke, but I think it would have been more hollow and more obviously woke had they done what they'd done previously in the sequel trilogy and Solo, which is no female character can ever lose. Rey is always the bestest at everything there is. There's no one that needs to teach her. There's no one that needs to train her. She can defeat anyone. There's no scars on her. She's perfect. And Kira from Solo basically proved that she could beat the villain of the piece easier than the titular hero. Like, we didn't need Han Solo to beat the villain. I don't remember what his name is, but Paul Bettany there, Kira defeats him, not Han Solo in the Han Solo movie. No, we need Kira to beat him. So again, this is, she's going out a martyr, and that's nice and everything, but it doesn't go along their mission statement as it's been, that no woman could ever lose, and somehow she would lead the forces on. I expected her to survive. I didn't really expect this. I suppose she wasn't really an essential character, but I figured they were going to give her the glory of leading those people to the Jordan River, so to speak. And no, she gets shot, and Obi-Wan, he gets to say no and keep that tradition going. And, it's a nice moment. The robot there is trying to protect her as he's going down, and it's pretty much too late. Although it makes you wonder, like I said, as the show goes on, we'll see that apparently in Disney Star Wars, you can get shot through the stomach, you can get stabbed through the stomach and survive, but only on every other day, because if you're Ming-Na Wing, you can come back like in 30 minutes. If you're Riva, you can cling to life and continue on. If you're Qui-Gon Jinn or Tala, you're dead. You know what I mean? And that's something that if you want to complain about, have at it. I get it. It makes no sense. It seems like in Disney Star Wars, they want to make it that not many people will die. They're just going to get their stomach full of wires and they'll be okay. And it just cheapens, because I know, like, when you're talking about MCU and stuff, it cheapens death. Coulson should have stayed dead or whatever. But, Loki's been dead like 3 or 4 times. But, that it plays by different rules, the comics. They play by different rules. In Star Wars, I don't think you should come back unless there is some legitimate, you can't get stabbed through the chest and come back. You can't get your stomach taken out and wires put in. You know what I mean? Unless you're going to do, we've already got Vader, and even it was just basically his limbs and some artificial respirator in his chest. You know what I mean? It has that little bit of legitimacy about it, I suppose. And I don't know. But anyway, so Tala won't be down for breakfast. She's apparently not joining Andor's cast. And, I think it worked. I mean, Obi-Wan hasn't lost a soldier in many years, and you could see this kind of affects him. And like I said, we probably didn't need this character going forward, so it works out. All right, so now Obi-Wan decides to give himself up. And again, this is something that, like, they could have done this a little earlier if he was going to do this. But I digress. But he decides to give himself up. And he goes to speak to Reva outside the Iron Gate. And the problem with this is I don't really understand what they're doing. I think the idea is they're speaking to each other through the Force, which, again, not taking the sequel trilogy, because I take nothing from the sequel trilogy into account, we don't really see this, I don't think, beyond Empire, right? When Vader's talking to Luke on the Falcon, he's like, "Son, come with me." And Luke is like, "Father." So I think this is meant to be they're speaking to each other through the Force, and not that they can hear each other through that heavy door. I think that's what this is at any rate. But again, like I said, you basically have to have a strong knowledge of what's going on in the original trilogy especially, but also the prequel trilogy. A lot of the people complaining, or a lot of the complaints that I've seen, are basically they don't want to remember details about the saga. It's like, "Oh, I caught you. I caught you. You made a mistake there. This isn't in canon. This is something that breaches canon. It's outside of canon. You made a mistake. It's a boo-boo." But they don't want to stop and think, well, did we see this before somewhere else in the saga? And we'll talk about that more in a second. But to get on with this conversation, and this is another one, people are complaining, "Well, didn't stormtroopers hear her talking and this and that?" The stormtroopers could barely see. I'm pretty sure they can't even hear with those helmets on. But I don't think they're really going to pick up too much from this one-sided conversation. Again, nitpick if you must. But I don't think that's really an issue. So basically, that happens, and then later on, he turns himself in. He comes out and gets the cuffs on him, and they put him down in a kneeling position, and Reva is sort of like gloating over him, so to speak, and then he's going to get turned over to Vader. And Obi-Wan is the smartest person in the room of this whole situation. Vader is kind of clouded by what his ambition here to catch Obi-Wan is, and Reva's got her own machinations that she's trying to accomplish. But Ben essentially says, "Look, I know what you want. You're not bringing me to Vader. You're bringing Vader to me." And he knows that she is going to double-cross Vader, and she's going to try to kill Vader. And he's basically like saying, "Look, make your move. Take your strike. Take your shot. Go ahead and do it." And so it feels very much like a Qui-Gon Jinn move. You know what I mean? It feels very Qui-Gon of him, where he's basically telling her, "Look, stab Vader in the back," knowing full well that she doesn't stand a chance against Vader, and we'll see that in a moment. But he's playing Reva like a fiddle here. He knows she's going to lose, and he's enticing her to basically throw all your eggs in one basket and just try to stab him in the back when he comes here. That is pretty brave of him, and it doesn't seem entirely Jedi-like. But then again, it seems like something Qui-Gon would do. He was trained by Qui-Gon, and he also knows that he's got these people depending on him, that he has to save them. So, again, I can buy it. All right, let me change this image here. We've been looking at that long enough. Now, she sends Obi-Wan back into the fortress there, and Obi-Wan promptly escapes and gets on the ship. And the ship is about ready to take off. And Vader comes down, marching down. And with no Imperial March, of course. I don't understand that. We'll get to that in a second, too. But Vader sees the ship starting to take off, and he uses the Force to stop the ship from taking off. And again, it was like I could feel through the Force millions of voices of angry fanboys crying out, "Why didn't Vader do this in The Empire Strikes Back to the Falcon?" And of course, there's like a GIF going around of that, of him doing that to the Falcon. And he pulls this ship down and starts tearing it apart from the inside out. And as he's doing this, the real ship on the side takes off and gets away. Now, of course, again, this is a source of ridicule and hilarity to some, but apparently Vader isn't God. You know what I mean? He was busy focusing on something when he thought he had them because of his hubris, and he thought he had Obi-Wan. He was ready to tear the ship apart and take Obi-Wan by the throat. The other ship took off and caught him by surprise. Wow. That is hard to believe. I don't know about you, but I am shocked. I am stunned that something like that could have happened to the great Darth Vader, because we all know that something like that is beyond him. All right, so the ship takes off, and Vader's none too thrilled. And Reva decides this is the point where she's going to try to stab him in the back. She's going to try to take out Darth Vader, and she's going to do it right now while he's ticked. And let's just say it doesn't go so well for her. And he is basically just toying with her this whole fight. It really is a joy to behold. Again, this is not woke. You cannot claim any of this as woke. Reva is not a Mary Sue. She has plot armor that is thick as Bestine, but she is not a Mary Sue, because she cannot even, he's toying with her like she's a rag doll. She cannot even get on first base with trying to score a hit here. And Vader is not even taking out his lightsaber during this whole fight. He's using the Force to block the saber blows. He takes her saber, her Inquisitor saber that goes around like a spinning top, and he uses the Force to stop it. He takes the saber away from her, breaks it in half, and uses it and gives her the other side, and like, tempts her to use it. It's just, he just toys with her until he finally does her in. And it's really it's really exciting. But see, this is the thing about how fans are never satisfied. Now you get the complaint, all this time we watched Anakin and Obi-Wan spar in the past during this flashback. What purpose does that serve? And then you got people on the other side saying, well, Vader clearly didn't break a sweat. This is what passes for a lightsaber fight these days. Nobody's ever happy. Star Wars fans can't be happy. They've conditioned themselves that they can never be happy. You've got a flashback of two of the most highly skilled Jedi training, sparring, and doing the most classical Jedi moves you've ever seen. They're classically trained, and you're turning your nose up at it because you don't think it serves a story purpose, which it does. And at the same time, if Reva ever did strike a blow on Vader, if she ever made him look like he was breaking a sweat, you would have had people go ballistic, because Reva is not allowed to be competent up to Vader's level. And I agree with that. I don't think she should be. I think they did the right thing. But this is where I say again, fans don't know what they want. They're never satisfied. And it's a sad thing, because they really gave you exactly what should have happened in this scene. Vader's toying with Reva. She doesn't have a leg to stand on, almost literally. And Vader runs her through. And of course, that should be the end of Reva's story right there. That should be the end of it. Should be over with. She should be dead now, and that's it. But unfortunately, she's going to survive this. The original Grand Inquisitor comes in, gets to rub her face in it a little bit. He gets the last word, "Oh, we're going to leave you in the gutter where we found you," like he said originally. And again, this is not woke. Show me how this is woke. We have the Grand Inquisitor, of course, the people are going to complain, how is he still alive? Well, the people that know anything about the Clone Wars and the Rebels and all the other material that's out there know this. I didn't, because I don't really watch that. So I'm glad some people are keeping up with that. But apparently he has two stomachs. And that makes sense that he can get stabbed through one stomach and not die. Riva, on the other hand, I don't understand how she survives this. That's a problem. But I can understand. All right, the OG Grand Inquisitor, he survives because he's got two stomachs. I mean, we've seen bigger leaps of faith with Spock, having him come back. Well, his heart isn't in the right place for a human, as a human would have it, so he survived. Or he didn't go blind because he has an extra set of eyelids. Or, they've been doing that with Spock for 60 years. They conceived that whole thing to bring him back from the dead when he was killed in Wrath of Khan. I mean, so come on. I can give the Grand Inquisitor another stomach, okay? Riva, on the other hand, if she's supposed to be human, which I guess apparently she is, I don't know how she survives this. But again, this is not woke. How do you explain her not only failing, but failing royally, and the Grand Inquisitor, basically a white dude, ostensibly, rubbing it in her face that she's a failure? I mean, if you're looking at this and complaining of it being woke, I don't think you understand what woke is. I don't think you understand what the woke mission statement is. It's that the women can never fail. And you're making a person of color woman fail in this series. It's not progressive. You know what I'm saying? It's not progressive. So anyway, Vader really could care less. He listens to the Inquisitor gloat for a minute or two, and then he's off. And Riva, and of course the Grand Inquisitor leaves as well. Riva finds the because Hodge is still around. I think that's his name, the Indian guy that was from Eternals, and he drops the communicator. Everybody else got away, and everybody's fine, but the communicator's still there. And she picks up the message, the garbled message of Bail Organa, and she makes out from it that the boy is on Tatooine with Owen, and Bail is going to go look after him, which apparently doesn't happen, because once they go to Tatooine, Bail is nowhere to be found. I guess he was on his way there, maybe. I don't know. But Obi-Wan feels a premonition in the Force, and he goes on to say, nah, I'm sure it'll be all right. And we move on to the next episode, where Riva gonna do something fierce to young Luke. She's gonna go and kill Luke Skywalker and cause nothing but trouble for the galaxy far, far away. Now, Riva goes to Tatooine. We don't know how she gets there. We don't know how she survives. Now, again, I don't need to be handheld. I don't need to be spoon-fed. But you do need to have some sort of connective tissue to hang on. I think what they were trying to do with her is sequel trilogy garbage, where you remember Kylo Ren when he's fighting Rey, and he's like beating his chest some weird way, and like blood is coming out of his armor or something. And the idea is that his anger, his pain, his frustration or whatever is fueling him. I don't think that keeps you from dying. You know what I mean? If you've got a mortal wound, a mortal injury, I don't think that is going to carry you through. Your anger and pain is going to carry you through. But that seems to be what they were going for here. And I don't know, quite honestly, when Palpatine says, your hate has made you powerful, your anger gives you focus, I don't think what was communicated by that is that gives you superhuman powers to live beyond a mortal wound, in other words. So anyway, we'll just, again, I don't know. They could have just said she had some kind of quick back to treatment, not even a full immersion in the tank. Just say that maybe she got some kind of emergency treatment with a medical droid at that place. Maybe, I don't know. On that regular one base, maybe there was an Imperial droid there that she kind of manipulated. I mean, I don't know. They should have given us something like that. And I mean, I can understand maybe they found a ship. She found a ship that, maybe that was a double entendre. They found a ship, but on the ship she took off that was there. I don't know. I mean, it reminds me of The Dark Knight Rises, where everybody's like, well, how did Bruce get transportation back into Gotham when Gotham was shut down? It's the same kind of question here. I mean, really, if you take 10 seconds, you can figure something out. She found a ship. She had some kind of emergency treatment on that ship. And even though she's still, mortally wounded, she's made enough of a recovery to sort of be capable, put it that way. But again, they should have given us some kind of, at least a throwaway line at this point. So Reva's back on Tatooine, and she's bringing her $5 intimidation act to the town in order to find Luke and do something fierce to him. Now, this is another problem. Now, this is a problem that I have, and a lot of people have picked up on it. And I don't think you can just sweep this problem away. Why does she want to kill Luke? Who does she think she's going to hurt? Now, she knows that Anakin is Vader. All right, that's fine. She doesn't know that Luke is Vader's son. She doesn't know that Leia is Vader's daughter. She doesn't know any of this. So why does she want to try to kill Luke? Now, the only thing I can come up with, and it makes the most sense, and again, they don't really tell you this, but apparently she wants to kill Luke as punishment to Obi-Wan, who basically left her for the wolves. He basically told her, look, don't worry about it. You can kill Vader. You want to get him, he's all yours. And for some reason, she buys that and tries to kill Vader. He humiliates her and ostensibly is going to kill her. And she still manages to find a way to survive. And now she wants revenge on Obi-Wan because she couldn't kill Vader, who she originally wanted in the beginning. So now she wants to punish Obi-Wan. That's legitimately the only explanation I can find. And again, if you're looking for complaints, about this show, you can look no farther than the Reva character, because it's terribly written. And I honestly think, we'll get to that in a second. I'll tell you why I think Reva is badly written. We finally get some music cues in this last episode. They play the Imperial March at one point. I think they play a little snippet of Battle of the Heroes or something like that. They play Leia's theme. They play a little bit of the asteroid field or something. They at least get to it at this point. Now, why they waited so long, I don't understand. This goes back to what I said earlier in the show, where I said you have to have some epic moments. The reason why we didn't have too many epic moments also deals with the fact that they didn't reuse any John Williams music for the whole show up until the last episode. Now, quite honestly, John Williams did an Obi-Wan theme, which is barely there. I mean, I hear a few notes of it here and there, but that even isn't seeming to be prevalent in the show. The problem seems to be is that they wanted to go on their own so much. They didn't want to rely on John Williams' music. This is the show you rely on John Williams' music. The Force theme, the Imperial March. You would have had people hyped and excited to the 10th degree, but no, they didn't want to do it. And I don't understand that. And when they finally get back on the ball with that music, it's in the final inning. I don't get it. All right, so Obi-Wan says that he's going to do the noble thing, and he's going to, because they're chasing the ship. They're chasing the ship with Ice Cube Jr. and all the refugees, and they're trying to get away. All right, so Obi-Wan's going to get into the jump ship, and he's going to meet Vader below on the surface. Princess Leia doesn't want him to go, and obviously, I like the way that they gave him something to do in the life of Princess Leia as well. I like that there's a connection between him and both the twins. So I said that from the beginning. But now they try to give Princess Leia like her Excalibur moment. Like Luke gets Anakin's lightsaber, that's the most important thing. That's, that's his Excalibur, and it sets him on the path, and this and that. But Leia doesn't really have that, and they try to do something with that by giving her Tala's holster, because this holster was apparently important to her, and when she was helping free the Jedi from the pursuit of the Inquisitors. And I guess this is supposedly the holster that Leia wore on Endor when they had the assault on the bunker. I guess that's the one. It's it kind of reminds me of how, like, Disney Star Wars, they try to find something like to hold on to. Like in the sequel trilogy, they had the dice that was in the Falcon cockpit, and that suddenly became like an important thing that Han Solo was known for. But it's in the same way here. This is not really the most significant thing that I imagine Leia possessed, but it is sort of a good indication of him. It also reminded me a little bit of I'm not really a big Lion Witch in the Wardrobe guy, but sort of how Santa Claus gives like weapons to the kids, and he goes, "I'm not going to give you a blaster, Leia," but the idea is that she has a future ahead of her too, and she's going to be a fearless leader, and the the uh, the meaning behind it reminds me of like Anakin in the sort of the sides, the rehearsal scenes where he says, "I won't always be a little boy." And it's kind of the same thing here. He says something to that effect. Again, it feels very authentic. And that is something I like a lot about this, is it feels like authentic Star Wars. When it has to do with Obi-Wan and Princess Leia, usually it feels like that. Now, again, people are saying like, well, all right, so you've got the people complaining about, well, Leia didn't grieve for Obi-Wan when, Obi-Wan died in A New Hope, but, you know, she had to console Luke. Again, this is just like, it's the most not mind-numbingly bad takes I've ever seen. And people make these takes like they're so legitimate. You know what I mean? I have to say, I don't know where the thinking comes in. I don't know unless you have some preconceived notion that you're going to hate it. That's the only reason why you're going to find these things as something so grievous that is going to sink the whole saga for you. Let's take a look at, once again, the original trilogy. Princess Leia sees her planet blow up right in front of her. The next time we see her, like 20 minutes later, she's making a joke about Luke's height. I mean, this is a family, kids fantasy, sci-fi fantasy. This is not to be taken too heavily. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't understand how people nowadays, they take it very bad when you say, well, it's a kid's space wizard fantasy. Essentially, that's what it is. I mean, you have Obi-Wan die, and then 10 minutes later, Han and Luke are having a rivalry over who gets to nab Leia. You're taking it a little too far if you think she's not grieving. The characterization of Leia is that she can compartmentalize her feelings. She says so much to the guy. I don't know what that character's name was, but she ostensibly says, "We'll have time for our sorrows another time." And it's the same thing with Leia consoling Luke. I mean, Luke is a farm boy caught up in a situation that he wasn't prepared for. Leia has been preparing for this fight from day one, basically, at least from now, from this age on. She's been preparing herself for being in the thick of it. You don't have to go any further than have Luke confirm this for you when in Return of the Jedi he says, "You've always been strong." When she finally lets that mask slip for a moment, and she's not going to be the tough soldier. She's going to be just a, frightened person who's like concerned about Luke, concerned about what's going to happen with Vader, with the whole plan all hinging upon them destroying the bunker. It was nice that they get to that point with her because she's been unbelievably strong through the whole series. And again, she is like the big sister in effect at this point, comforting the little brother, because Luke wasn't ready for all this. He wasn't adapting as quick as she's had the years, 10 years at least, to adapt to this. He hasn't had a chance yet, and she has already seen her planet blow up. So again, I don't see where you have this as a stumbling block for you that's going to ruin the whole entire saga. So it's nice that she gets this little moment, and it begins her path, and I think that's a good sign. The thing is, though, is people will complain because this is Leia's story, and Luke is an afterthought. I'm going to comment on that in a second too, because I do think they didn't do right by Luke in this. Now, let's take a look. We finally get our introduction to Luke, and it's not an introduction at all. This is what's bugged me about this. Now, this story is really Leia's story because it's about Obi-Wan and Leia. I understand that. But hopefully they'll give Luke, his equal time, because he doesn't even get an introduction here. Quite honestly, they treat him like, oh, you remember Luke from the original trilogy? Yeah, you all know Luke. Okay, well, here he is. And he sort of just wanders into town with Owen to buy, I don't know, spark belts or whatever for speeders. And the guy that runs the store was there with Reva in the beginning of the episode, and she basically has already threatened Owen. So Owen gets the tip from this guy, be careful, because I guess, for some reason there's this crazy chick who's after who's after Luke for some reason. And again, I don't think that they really did right by Luke with this, because this guy is more important to the saga than just to give him walking in off the street and suddenly, oh, there's Luke. But again, it is what it is. I think if they do a second season, they really need to rectify this. And that's why I think, well, we'll talk about that later when we get to the end of it. So now we have the Lars ready for this assault that's going to be going on at their hacienda. And it's very interesting because we finally got Aunt Beru saying some pre-A New Hope lines. I always found it like really sad that the only thing she says in Attack of the Clones is hello. Because, give her the benefit of a couple of lines. I suppose there were probably a few things recorded that didn't make the final cut. But we finally get those lines by her here. A lot of people as well were kind of surprised about this. But again, this didn't really surprise me that they decided to fight this out on the homestead. Because, of course, one doesn't have to go any further than Attack of the Clones to see that the Sand People were a real danger. They were going to take out farms if they went on a raid. And these farmers had to be well equipped and well skilled with using laser rifles or blaster rifles. And so to see that not only were Owen and Beru well stocked with said weaponry, that they knew how to use them. I mean, this is pure George Lucas. This is how, the frontier was won, when you had, having to defend your homestead. And, it became something that I think in the DNA of Star Wars, that's what Tatooine is. It's like the frontier. It's you've got to defend your homestead from invaders. It's the same thing you get here with Owen and Beru. Now, I think what happens here is pretty good as well. Is they set this thing up where Reva gets in and she doesn't really, Luke doesn't see any of this. They lock him all away. I think this is pretty much, again, keeping things intact as far as Luke is concerned. He doesn't see Reva with a lightsaber, I'm pretty sure. And, Uncle Owen is trying to, they're both trying to shoot her, but Uncle Owen is trying to sort of do some combat against a lightsaber, which doesn't work out too well. And then when Reva breaks through that line of defense, like Beru is the next line of defense, and she doesn't really make quite as big a stand as I think people are trying to pretend online. But again, she's doing her best, and Luke gets away and makes for the hills, so to speak. And we'll switch back over now to the fight of the century, the rematch of the century, where Obi-Wan takes on Vader for the next time, at least before A New Hope. All right, so again, my only issue, and everybody knows what my biggest problem with the series is. My biggest problem with the series is they didn't do the one thing. I feel like that, you had one job. Pay off that one line in Return of the Jedi. Just pay it off. Pay off that one line. When Vader says to Luke, Obi-Wan once thought as you do. Lucas didn't pay it off in Revenge of the Sith, and they don't pay it off here. I don't know what they're waiting for. I don't think you really can have Vader and Obi-Wan fight again after this. I think you've pushed it about as far as you can in credulity, because this is what was supposed to happen, and they paid it off brilliantly. They had Obi-Wan showing who's the master. Now, he just is relentless on Vader. Of course, Vader starts off strong. He gets the upper hand. He uses like a force push, so to speak, to break up the ground. And people don't seem to complain about that much. I thought that was going to be something that we're going to complain about, because on the one hand, you think he can put out flames with the force, but then again, with him pushing the ground with a force push, breaking up the ground, you don't accept that. You know what I mean? I don't know. But anyway, he falls into this sort of pit, Obi-Wan, and Vader is trying to bury him alive, so to speak. Obi-Wan's holding the debris from completely burying him, and Vader sort of just leaves him for dead. And Obi-Wan gets the sort of the feelings through the force of Leia and Luke, and how they need him, and he needs to be there to protect them. And it gives him the strength to get out of this predicament. And I like that. I thought that was nice. Of course, again, we didn't really get to see Luke at all. Now, that's the problem. That should have been dealt with at the beginning of this show. That we would have seen Luke a little bit more. And because all they really have is like 2 little instances, I think, to show of him in this flashback, because he hasn't been able to get close to Luke. So then the fight reemerges. And again, it smacks of not really having fan input, because the dialogue again is very, very pedestrian. Instead of we just get sort of callbacks to Vader says, "Did you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?" And Obi-Wan says, "I'll do what I must." And Vader says, "Your strength is returned, but the weakness remains." Again, this is like sort of generic stuff, and it's meant to call back the Revenge of the Sith as well as New Hope. But at some point, you have to have that kind of dialogue to really spice up the match. Now the fight goes on, and it's really good. It reminds me a lot of the Revenge of the Sith fight. They're more stationary. There's not a lot of jumping around. There's just a lot of well choreographed fighting. The camera doesn't really do it any favors, but I think that it's a well choreographed fight, unlike what we've seen pretty much before that, the first fight between them. And the idea is that, and I think they've pulled it off well, is that this is a fight in between Sith and Hope, where it's not so immobile as A New Hope, where they're fighting in a hallway and there's just no room. And it's not like there's danger of jumping over lava and, climbing up the scaffolding and stuff. This is sort of in the middle of that, where they're on a flat base. They're both a little older. Anakin, of course, is not physically as capable as he was in the first fight, and Obi-Wan's a little older and maybe a little off the mark. So it really works out well in that way, where it's a pretty balanced fight between the two movies. And at a certain point, Obi-Wan just completely destroys Vader and humiliates him. And I don't know, as jaded of a Star Wars fan as you can possibly be, how could you not have a giddy grin on your face watching that fight? I have no idea, because they really basically paid in spades everything off that was owed to us in the line from A New Hope: "When I left you, I was but the learner, now I am the master." That line is still intact. No crying, no fanboy tears, no nerds crying in their beer. It works, and we got a great fight out of it. Now, something else I see people complaining about is that Obi-Wan actually used the rocks around him as weapons. I don't see that as a problem. This is basically what Vader did to Luke in Empire, and Obi-Wan was wise enough to be able to use his surroundings to his advantage. People seem to think, though, that I think this gives credibility to Rey doing something like this. I think in The Last Jedi, I honestly have wiped Last Jedi out of my mind. I don't even know exactly how this compares. But again, this feels very much like in keeping. And he's using the back of the lightsaber to bash Vader's chest plate in. He's just outmaneuvering him, out fighting him, out sword playing him. And again, this goes back to the sparring duel where Obi-Wan's trying to learn him that basically being more aggressive doesn't necessarily win you the day, because that's basically what Anakin says. He's like, mercy doesn't win the fight, but basically it does in his case in Return of the Jedi. But so we get the payoff here where they finally are talking to each other. Now, again, in Revenge of the Sith and this show, Obi-Wan doesn't make even the slightest overture about trying to turn Anakin back to the good side. This would be the place to do it. This would be probably your last place to do it, because after this, you're not going to be afforded many more opportunities. The only thing I can see is if maybe they're talking to each other from the Force. I think you could do maybe a nice conversation that way. But the problem is, the way they leave it here, Anakin has totally, divorced himself from, his Anakin personality. He's just embraced being Vader at this point. And it's heartbreaking because Ewan does a wonderful job here with this scene. They both do. But they have Hayden talking partially with his own voice, partially with James Earl Jones's simulated voice. And it's very effective. And, the color scheme of the lightsabers and so forth. It looks great. But at no point does Obi-Wan even try to tell him to come back to the good side of the Force. And I think the reason for that is, again, the backlash once again is, well, why doesn't Obi-Wan kill him now? Why doesn't Obi-Wan kill him? I don't understand that line of reasoning, because there's so many ways, and this video is long enough as it is. Maybe we should talk about it some other time. But he had already leveled Anakin and laid him low once before. He couldn't bring himself to kill Anakin then. I don't think he's going to be able to now or in A New Hope. It's just too hard for him to kill his own brother, by his own admission. Also, again, the Jedi are not meant to be executioners. I don't know where you see that as there is some kind of moral basis for him killing, and in some cases literally unarmed, Anakin. In this case, he was completely decimated. He's not brought down this low until Luke defeats him in Return of the Jedi. I mean, he's wheezing, he can barely breathe, he can't stand, and Obi-Wan has brought him to this point. I don't see where you think Obi-Wan can just walk over there and lop his head off now. That does not seem to be the Jedi way. You know, Anakin killing Dooku, he said that it wasn't the Jedi way. And you have Mace Windu going to try to kill Palpatine. Anakin says he must stand trial. You know, there is some kind of code to the Jedi where you don't just kill a defenseless opponent. I don't know why people don't seem to see that. They think that for some reason the crimes of Vader are imputed over to Obi-Wan just because he didn't kill Vader when he had the chance. I don't see how you can find him culpable for anything Vader did simply because he wasn't going to murder Anakin when Anakin was either completely defenseless or there was no way he possibly could have protected himself. Again, this is, you know, I don't see people making these complaints as being very legitimate. And the complaints that have gone on to me have been just baffling. It's staggering in, honestly, the sheer stupidity of them. But anyway, let's get down to the final. Of course, it's a heartbreaking scene. And Obi-Wan says, you know, my friend is truly dead, echoing Luke in Return of the Jedi. And he says, goodbye, Darth. He calls him Darth, which basically, again, sets us up for A New Hope. Again, you know, I don't understand the problem people have with this. And like I said, I've always found, like, Darth as a slur. Like, he's basically saying you're no better than Maul, and you're no better than Dooku now. You're no better than Sidious. Because to be a Darth, you have to be completely sold out. And Obi-Wan had hopes of him coming back up until that point. Up until the point where he calls him Darth. So I don't know where you fit in now, where he tried to convince him to give up the dark side. I don't know where you put it. I don't know where you put it now. Now, Reva has been following Luke. She's trying to kill Luke, and she uses the Force to, like, make him fall off a cliff or something, a small cliff. And he gets knocked out, and she sees visions of herself as a child, so she can't kill Luke. Now, again, this is not really a great face turn, that you can't kill an unconscious child. You know what I mean? That's where I say how the writing, it really lets down this character. And so she brings back Luke, and Obi-Wan is back at the homestead now, and Beru and Owen are looking for Luke, and Reva brings him back, and she basically, you know, she bears her soul to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan sort of absolves her and tells her, you know, you can be whatever you want to be now. And I think what they were trying to do with Reva was they were trying to make her like a parallel of Anakin, where he became the thing that he sought to destroy. He was supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. In the same way, you know, Reva was a promising, you know, I suppose they were all promising Padawans who could have been a noble Jedi, but then because of the path that unfortunately befell her, she became an Inquisitor, became dark side of the Force user, and now, you know, unfortunately, her path has led her to, you know, doing terrible things in the name of wanting to do something good originally, which was to destroy Vader. Again, I think it was just, it got so convoluted when you, even me just trying to figure that out in my mind right now where I said that, it's very convoluted. I mean, we have to imagine, again, like we seen her terrorizing townfolk earlier. She must have, blood on her hands from doing some terrible things. But as I said earlier in the broadcast, at what point were we supposed to sympathize with her? At what point were we supposed to say, well, she's a good person inside trying to get out, and that she really could have been a good Jedi if she'd had the chance. Unfortunately, we don't see any of that to give us any indication that she could have been. All we see in her great face turn is that she refused to kill an unconscious child. That's not really doing something so great. Now, again, supposedly there's going to be a Reva series. I don't believe it for a moment. I don't think anybody likes this character enough to bring her back. I think what ostensibly happens here is she's still dying. I mean, she could very well have expired off screen and nobody would even care. We don't know really what becomes of her, but Obi-Wan basically, like I said, absolves her, sends her on her way, and that's the end of it. I think the whole thing about there going to be a Reva series is twofold. One, they're kind of trying to will it into existence because Disney really wants this. They want to be feminist Star Wars for some reason. And it's not beyond them. It's not beyond them to try to give people something like this, even if they don't want it. But I think, moreover, the real reason for this is it's usually what they do when they try to thank someone. They're thanking Moses Ingram because they knew nobody was going to like this character. They knew that her performance was not very good. And to her credit, she plays the ending with, it's an emotional ending where she's, in tears, and she's, looking at the folly of her existence, of a life of being a dark side user. And she plays this much better. And I think she was probably cast for this scene more than the scenes of her trying to be big and mean and tough with people. She's a lot better here. And I think giving her this supposed spin-off show is basically just thanking Moses Ingram for saying, look, we know that this was kind of beyond you. We know that nobody was going to like this character, but we also appreciate what you did. So we're going to say you're going to get a show, kind of like we did with Rian Johnson with the Rian Johnson trilogy. But at some point, we're going to forget all about it. And then probably, it won't even be officially canceled. It'll just continually be put off in perpetuity. And so that's the name of that tune. Before we wrap up here with Reva, let me just say, like I was alluding to earlier, the problem I think with the writing on the show is twofold. Now they're talking about, I didn't put it down in my notes. This one of the writers of the show named Jody or something said that he hadn't watched Star Wars or some of the movies, and a lot of people making a lot of ink about, well, the writer of the show doesn't even care about what's going on. I think there's two sides to that. There are like 3 or 4 writers for this. I think the Jody guy or whoever that is that supposedly knows nothing about Star Wars, he was the guy I think that was assigned the writing chores for Reva. Because Reva, the writing really makes no sense. She's the weak link of the show, not only because of the actress, I'm very quick to point out, is because the writing for her isn't the best. It isn't the most consistent, and it doesn't make much sense under scrutiny. Now, the other people that wrote it, you can tell there's some people that did their homework here. That's why I don't understand when a lot of fans want to try to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They're looking for something to complain about. But when you have some of these things lining up, for instance, Anakin saying, you didn't kill Anakin, I did. Oh, that ties into Obi-Wan saying Vader betrayed and murdered your father. When you have things like, just lots of different things where you can feel the presence of someone that really is into George Lucas's version of Star Wars. Somebody like that is responsible for a lot of these moments. because, a lot of these moments are tied together, between the stuff between Anakin and Obi-Wan, especially, are tied in very tightly to the prequels, as well as some of it being used from, the original trilogy. I have to believe that this is a piecework effort where somebody's writing Riva who doesn't really know the lore, someone's writing stuff about Anakin and Obi-Wan that does know the lore, and there's somebody in the middle who's sort of the trying to put the feminist ideals of Star Wars into the show. And I think that's where you get a very uneven show here. And that's what I said. It's not a bad show. It's just uneven in that there are too many hands doing too many things at one time. Not all of them work well together, and the parts that work well work very well, but they could have worked better if they had some cohesion. And I think that's the sad epithet of the show, really, is that it needed some cohesion with all hands really caring about the saga more than what they have actually given us. All right, wrapping it up here. We had our cameo of Ian McDiarmid's Emperor. That was very exciting. I was glad to see him involved. They're talking about like a Darth Vader show. You got to have the Emperor involved in that cameo here. But the makeup was good. The makeup was very good. I like that they used more of a Return of the Jedi look than the heavy rubber mask of Revenge of the Sith and most subsequent, views. I think his lips looked pretty black, though. This reminded me a little bit of Rise of Skywalker. They kind of, I don't know, it kind of looked a little off to some extent. But again, they made the effort here, and, the Emperor is not particularly pleased with Vader. Vader sort of, he's accusing him of being too obsessed with Obi-Wan, and that, he's got to come back to the reality that he's working for the Emperor. And, that works very well with what's going on here, because we know the machinations of Vader. He's obsessed with things very easily. He's obsessed with Obi-Wan. He's obsessed with Luke later on. And he does have some hopes of sort of besting the Emperor at some point and taking over for him. But yeah, kudos to Ian McDiarmid. I'm glad he's always up for these things, and I'm sure he would, he would sink his teeth into the role again if he was on a Darth Vader show, which I hope he gets a chance at doing. We have the farewell scene here with Princess Leia and Obi-Wan, and I thought it was kind of nice. He's trying to impart some memories of, some positive memories of Anakin and some memories of Padme to her. I thought this was very nice. And again, this is what I mean about how they're paying the right kind of service to, the characters. Now, one of the most famous gripes is, well, how does Leia remember her mother if she died in childbirth? And again, they're kind of trying to pay service to that with him actually telling her some things about Padme and Anakin, although, that's never brought up. But she had some kind of, ideas about Padme, and those kind of things are like hand waved with, well, she has the Force. She just knows because she has the Force. Well, maybe this is sort of the beginning of that. Maybe this is the beginning of her being able to reach out and have some of these feelings for Padme, especially because Obi-Wan sort of brought them to light to her. That's what I mean about how people are so quick to sort of dismiss the writing when they do have some attempts here to really deepen the lore. And I think they have deepened the lore in many ways. When you go back and watch the prequels and the original trilogy, you will be able to call back to certain things from this show. Certain things become more important, more deeper when you see them after seeing this show. All right, and so finally, we have Obi-Wan going back to the Lars homestead after all the hullabaloo. and he basically is moving out of his cave. He's moving on up, moving on up, and I guess he's gonna get that little house, that sweet little house that he's got in A New Hope. He's got some new digs on his way. He's gonna scope out, but he stops off at the Lars homestead, and I like the fact that Uncle Owen isn't like ready to strangle him every time he sees him. You know what I mean? I kind of think that we know Owen is sort of like a gruff caretaker for Luke, but he's got the best of intentions, and so I don't think him wanting to strangle Obi-Wan every time he sees him is necessarily the go-to thing for his character. So he kind of like is like Obi-Wan's, I'm gonna move on, and I'm not gonna worry about Luke. He's gonna have a childhood. I'll worry about training him later. And Owen's like, well, do you want to meet him? And we finally get the line I think everybody was waiting for. At least once in every trilogy or series, we get the hello there. And so we get the introduction to Luke. Again, I really think Luke deserved better here. Now, I'm guessing we already know that Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor have said they want to do more sequels. They want to do more seasons. In Hayden's case, it might be his own show. He might be a Darth Vader show, so that might be a little different. But they both want to come back to the character. Ewan McGregor has said, I think we can tell a couple more stories before we run out of space, in the story of Obi-Wan. And I think they owe it to Luke because they really didn't focus on him. Now, I understand that, and a lot of people will complain about it, that, they didn't focus on Luke here. But this is really Leia's story. Luke gets to have his story in A New Hope, but we do need to see him sort of get to know Obi-Wan beyond just, hello there. Just beyond, oh, he's like a crazy old hermit. We've got to see them sort of that they know each other, because you see in A New Hope, there's a real familiarity with Obi-Wan to Luke. I mean, he's like really happy to see him when he sees him, when he wakes up from being unconscious from the Tusken Raiders attack. So, I mean, it feels like he's known him for some time. A lot of people want to make a big deal about Princess Leia knowing him. She only knew him for about a week, I mean, it's not the same way that Luke seems to have known him off and on for like 10 years of his life. I could easily see teenage Luke, in his land speeder, stopping by and seeing Obi-Wan once or twice in the course of his journeys. That can't be said of Princess Leia. That won't happen again. I don't think he should see Princess Leia again. But in this case, they do have a second season that they could very easily do with Luke. And I hope they do that because the character of Luke has earned it. And it probably will depend on who's going to write it, because I know Favreau and Filoni, I think, have a appreciation of the character of Luke because they've done all they could to put him in The Mandalorian. And I don't know if the jury's out if he's going to be in Ahsoka, but we'll see. And finally, let's get to the final post-credit almost, if you will. But Obi-Wan's on his way. He's going through the Dune Sea or whatever this is. And of course, we finally get the cameo of Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson finally showing up in a Star Wars production as Qui-Gon Jinn. I wanted to say in the flesh, but in the ghostly flesh. We finally got him back in the costume, back in the role that he made famous. He still looks pretty good for his age. You could tell some time has passed, but he credit to them that they brought him back in. And he basically tells Obi-Wan that he was there all the time, sort of in the Good Witch of the the North or whatever fashion, that he was always there, but Obi-Wan just didn't see him, just didn't sense him, I guess. And this is what leads me to believe there could be a third season of Obi-Wan, because once you do the adventure with Luke, as I've said before, my idea for that would be like Darth Maul comes after Obi-Wan. And of course, they don't want to do that because Rebels isn't canon to them still. But Luke gets in danger, and Obi-Wan and him has some kind of adventure on the plains of Tatooine. But the third season, I think you could probably do 3 seasons altogether, is you have Obi-Wan take some vision quest with Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon explains to him about how to see people in the Force and how to retain their identity. And I think, that's very interesting because Lucas never was able to explain this. And I know there's probably some EU references or maybe something in the Clone Wars they touched on, but to have this in live action would be nice. And I think they could probably build a story around it. And you would have some interesting things there because you could talk a lot also about Vader, and you could explain basically how they pulled Vader into the netherworld of the Force when he dies, because he dies a Jedi. And so even if he didn't learn this, at some point Obi-Wan and Yoda pull him into the netherworld of the Force. Apparently Qui-Gon's got to show them how to do that because he's been learning all this from the inside, and now he's telling them how to do it, like, from the outside. And I think in this third season, this hypothetical third season I'm talking about, you could also involve Yoda somehow talking to them through the Force, maybe doing something a little esoteric, but it would be interesting. I think it would be worth doing. All right, so as we wrap up, let us just go over briefly what I've been saying. The show altogether as a whole, I think it could have benefited from some better writing. I think they could have given some more, rah-rah moments, for lack of a better term. Something, some better musical choices that evoked the original series. They could have done some better filling in some of the gaps of why things were happening as they did. Tighten up some of the characters. Give us some character moments. That's what I think we needed more of. Like I said, a longer discussion between Bail and Obi-Wan. A longer discussion between Obi-Wan and Owen. Have some more Luke in the show. Give him a bit of an introduction before turning it into the Leia show. You know what I mean? There were some things they could have done that would have made this, a 10 out of 10, 5 stars out of 5. I don't think it gets there because of that. Then, of course, you have the Reva situation. Not the best actress for the part. Probably not the best written character. They should have fleshed out the motivations a heck of a lot more. Again, this takes away from some of it. The problems that a lot of people, most people, I think, are complaining about, McCann. I don't think any of that was really an issue. I think everything is explainable. I think most of these things that people are bringing up are not even worth bringing up, that I think that they're so explainable that it's embarrassing that people are even complaining about it. Again, a lot of the relationships were captured very well. I like the relationships between, Obi-Wan and Leia, Obi-Wan and Vader. I think they needed to tighten up that Vader storyline with Obi-Wan trying to bring him back to the good side. They didn't really even make an effort there. So again, a lot of things that sort of knock this one down a notch. So I'm not going to be able, as much as I enjoyed it, and as much as I think it deserves credit, it certainly does not deserve being in the sequel trilogy box or even the Solo box. Solo was passable to me. Wasn't great, but it was sort of just a fun adventure movie. And it really, if they scrubbed that from canon, I really wouldn't care. But this is head and shoulders above both those things. The Mandalorian and Rogue One are still in the upper echelon. This is certainly much better than Boba Fett, the Book of Boba Fett. This really trounces that. But I would say this is the best Disney Star Wars has done so far. And it's a low bar to be sure, but I think it's pretty safe to say that if I was to watch any of those shows or movies again, I would definitely go to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Mandalorian is cute, but it doesn't really have the oomph of this show. And Rogue One, again, was good, but it's kind of, there's no legacy to it. You know what I mean? It's all those characters die, and they're going to try to retroactively bring back Cassian Andor. It's kind of a stretch. So anyway, I'm going to give this show 8 out of 10 stars. I think the first 3 episodes, I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think the last episode here, episode 6, bounces it up to an 8. I think the show as a whole, I'm giving it 8 out of 10. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars, which is great, but not exceptional. I'm going to give it an, again, this is tough to vacillate between B+ and A- in this case, but I'm going to give it an A-. A lot of great performances as well by Ewan McGregor, possibly his best performance as Obi-Wan in that 6th episode, when the final meeting between him and Anakin before, him and Vader before A New Hope. Just some great stuff there. And again, I think it really fills in a lot of bits that some people will complain about, but I think really deepens the lore as well. So I'm going to give it an A- in that respect. So thank you for making it through this long, epic broadcast. If you have, in fact, make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what you think about Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series. Do you want to see a season 2, possibly a season 3? Do you want to see Hayden return in a Darth Vader series at some point? What do you think is possible going forward? What did you think about the show? And again, I like the show. I entertain all views on it, but I am going to call you out if you're going to say things that are honestly really, really stupid. And I got to point them out. I'm sorry to say. I'm having a heck of a time on Twitter trying to keep my patience with some of the very, very bad takes that I've seen. And I've tried to point them out on Twitter. So check out my Twitter page in the link in the description below. But again, I'm going to hopefully go into a little more detail about these bad takes on another rant video that should be forthcoming before long. And so, until next we meet, this is Johnnie Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.